In this video, I'm going to explain to you what is an AI agent, how it's different from ChatGPT, and why you should care. Hey, if you're new to the channel, my name is Alfie Marsh. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Toolflow AI. We help companies in two ways. The first is with our platform, which allows you to build AI agents and automations without a single line of code. And the second is our AI agency, where if you don't want to build things, we can actually build custom agents and automations on your behalf. And we also help train and do workshops for your team to help upskill everybody for the AI era. So if either of those are interesting to you, just click on the link below this video and schedule some time with our team. Now, with that being said, let's get into the video. Now, I did record a video about 6 or 7 months ago answering exactly that, AI agents explained. Now, since then, there have been a lot of companies coming out with AI agents, and they are slightly different to each other. And it's not very clear for everybody what is an AI agent and what is not. So I wanted to just expand on that video, still starting very simple and go into a bit more of an advanced use case to make it very, very clear what they are, so that you can judge this when you're looking at these products. Now, before I jump into the explanation of AI agents, I want to just cover why they're so important. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote this article, and I want to draw your attention to the first couple of sentences here. Now, what I'm explaining here is that 50% of the entire US economy is the human labor market. So think about all of the salaries that are made up in the human labor market. That's 50% of GDP. Now, if you compare that to the entire technology sector, it's just 10%. So that means that the human labor market is 5 times bigger than the entire technology sector. Okay, so why is that important? When you think about AI agents, they are digital labor, a digital worker that can act like a human. They can understand ambiguous goals, and they know how to use tools and access information to solve them. They have agency, so they're actually behaving more like a digital employee than they are just a piece of software. And if you put that into the context of the human labor market being 5 times bigger than the technology sector, you could say the opportunity is worth about $10 trillion every year, which is enormous. But I would go one step further than that, which is the human labor market has one big constraint, which is humans. We can only increase the capacity really by giving birth to more humans and having a bigger population. Now, when you think of AI agents as digital labor, they are infinitely more scalable than human labor. So instead of $10 trillion every year, that market could be 50 trillion, 100 trillion. It's really how big can we scale up the AI agent labor force? Now, whilst that could be very scary from a perspective of humans losing jobs, it's also equally exciting because we're going to be able to produce an extraordinary amount of capacity. And that means we can have more inventions, more products, more niche products, more value in the economy. So the potential for wealth creation overall is absolutely enormous. And we might be on the verge of a period of economic growth like we've never seen before. So AI agents are extremely important right now. And to understand what they are is right at the beginning of this. Okay, great. So now we understand why they're so important. So what actually are they? Well, let's take a look at this definition. AI agents are a piece of software that use large language models to autonomously accomplish tasks. Now, note I'm saying it's a piece of software that use large language models, and an agent isn't necessarily a large language model itself. Now, they can autonomously accomplish tasks. Note how I said that it's a piece of software that uses large language models, but is not a large language model itself. So it's really a piece of software that is stitching stuff together. Now, they can autonomously accomplish tasks, and they do that by understanding what the goal of the task is itself was. It can then plan steps to then solve that problem, and then it can choose which tools or pieces of information and knowledge it can access in order to solve that problem. So this is very different from traditional software, which mostly has to be pre-programmed and coded already ahead of time. So you need to understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. You pre-code that up front, and then you can then solve that. So you click a button, something happens that's been predefined. An agent is very different because it has agency. You can kind of give it a bunch of tools and then say, hey, go solve this problem, and it will figure it out. So that behaves a lot more like a human employee would. Okay, so how is an AI agent different from an LLM? Well, fundamentally, an LLM is basically a language model that has been trained on a very large piece of information. So that information is mainly the internet. So companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, they all build their own language models. Actually, Microsoft is using OpenAI's model, but who cares about that? So an LLM is basically a large language model. So it's been trained on on a big corpus of information, which is the internet in this case. And what happens is once it's been trained, it can then answer queries. Now, I say query because a question is something like, what's the capital of France? And it would give a response like Paris. However, you can also query it. So I could say, write me a blog, and it would write a blog. Now, that's not a question, it's a query. But either way, you give an LLM a query, it then spits back a response. Now, things that we understand like ChatGPT, they're not actually the LLM itself. The ChatGPT and Claude products, they are actually chat interfaces that sit on top of these language models. Now, these chat interfaces allow us to communicate with the language model in a more conversational style, but they aren't actually the LLM itself. These large language models do have some limitations. Most notably, they don't have access to knowledge outside of their training data. So this is a huge one. If you think it was trained on the whole of the internet, but it doesn't have access to your CRM or potentially information about your customers or products or services, so it can't answer questions on that. It's just like saying if I was a kid and I grew up learning English and someone asked me a question in French, I wouldn't be able to answer it because I don't have access to that training data. Similarly, it can also not take action in the real world. So if you think of an LLM like the brain, it's been trained on a bunch of data. You can ask it a question and it will respond using its mouth. That's kind of like the chat interface. The actions and taking action in the real world is like your hands, where I can actually, open up a calendar, send a message, I can do something. These LLMs can't actually take action on their own. That's not what they were designed to do. And lastly, there are limitations with memory. So if I was to go to Claude, for example, if I start a new chat here, I say, hi, what's my name? It won't know what my name is. I've not told it yet. So it says, okay, I don't know your name. I say, hi, my name is Alfie. And then it says, okay, your name's Alfie. And then I say, what's my name? And it says, your name is Alfie. Okay, so if I start a new chat and I say, hi, what's my name? It doesn't know my name. So effectively, it doesn't have the memory beyond the chat history that I've actually used there. And now that's a problem. If you think about multi-agent systems that you need agents to talk to each other, they're going to need a way to kind of store this memory. And so these kind of basic LLMs have very limited capacity for memory. You can think of the chat thread history as being like short-term memory, whereas we also need long-term memory to be able to function well. Okay, so if we think of ChatGPT and these kind of chat interfaces as literally interfaces to chat with an LLM, then what is the difference with an agent? Well, going back to that definition, it can take action in the real world and it has access to knowledge that it wasn't necessarily trained on. So it looks a little bit different. Similar to the previous diagram, there's a query and there's a response. When you ask an agent a query, it's going to be using an LLM, and it uses that LLM, one, to interact with the user, have that conversation, but it's also going to use the LLM to understand the query and then think about how to actually solve it. So in this case, it's going to access tools. So if it doesn't have information in its training data, or it's not got access to like your Gmail, for example. So if it doesn't have access to a piece of information in its training data, it might use a tool to access the web and find the answer for you. And then again, it's going to use things like your knowledge base that you give it. Maybe it's your information about your customers or company help documentation to answer user queries. So it's basically this software that kind of works together with LLMs as well as tools as well as knowledge bases to then solve queries in a more robust way. The big part here of the agentic nature is it is figuring out with the query how it should use those tools and knowledge to solve the response. It's not pre-coded like traditional software. And that's where it becomes really, really powerful. So let's go back to Claude here and give an example. If I say, who won the US general election in 2024? This is going to be outside of Claude's training data. So it shouldn't know the answer. And it says here, it doesn't know because it was last trained up till April 2024. So it doesn't know the outcome of the 2024 US election. Okay, so that's an example of where the training data is a limitation. Now, if I go to ChatGPT and I ask the same thing, who won the US general election in 2024? I'm going to hit enter, but I want you to just be very cognizant of the loading state. It's going to start saying search in the web here. It's very quick. But here it says Donald Trump won the US election in 2024, but it basically did that by searching the web. So actually ChatGPT has now been turned into an agent because it's been given access to a tool. In this case, it's just a Google search web, or it's using Bing, for example. It searches the web and then answers that question. So it's been grounded in real up-to-date knowledge. So you could say that ChatGPT has actually become agentic. It knows how to use these different tools. And that's some of the different kind of chat interfaces have different levels of capability today. However, ChatGPT as a product only has access to a certain limited number of tools, such as Google search. It can search the web. It can do a couple of other things. But what happens when you want to do other sorts of tool usage? Like if I go down to here, an AI agent, maybe we want to build one to an email helper agent. So we're going to have access to Gmail and calendar and stuff like this. We might ask to summarize our Gmail inbox. Now, if I go to ChatGPT and say, can you summarize my unread messages in my Gmail inbox? It says, I cannot directly access your Gmail inbox, etc., etc. Here's some ways that you could do it. So ChatGPT doesn't have access to all my tools. And in that case, I might want to build a different agent in some other software and be able to build that. But an AI agent would be able to access different tools that you give it. It'll be able to perform certain tasks and then know how to use those tools. Now, the part where AI agents can become kind of confusing is technically anything could become an AI agent. So the Waymo autonomous vehicles that you see driving around in San Francisco, they do perceive information around the world through their cameras and their sensors, and then they have access to tools that can drive the car. So it's agentically deciding how to steer the wheel, how to apply the gas or the brake. And so it's doing a very similar thing. That kind of query and response is it's taking in information, it's processing it, it's then using a tool to then operate the vehicle. Same thing with a humanoid robot. It's doing a very similar thing, and it's using AI to do that. So there are kind of agentic products and services that take a more physical form. The ones that I've been showing you in terms of chat, they are accessing tools via APIs. So a lot of products that exist in the world, you can instruct them to do things via this thing called an API. It's basically allowing someone to send a bit of code to say, go into the Gmail API and send an email or receive my unread messages. Now that's a very structured, easy way for kind of code to interact with it. And these LLMs can get access to those APIs and do lots of powerful things. But what happens when you want to do something that doesn't have access to an API? That's where computer use comes in. Companies like Anthropic have released something called Anthropic Computer Use. It has a kind of chat interface where you can ask questions, but overall it's taken over your computer. It's going to be able to open up the browser, type in websites and scroll through and click on things and act like a human would be using the computer. So these agents are very similar. There's a query, there's a goal, and it has access to tools, i.e. taking over your computer, but it's kind of receiving information through screenshots of what's happening on the screen at the time and then figuring out exactly how to use the computer. So there are agents like computer use agents, there are autonomous vehicle agents, and there was also like chat interface kind of agents that we've been seeing today. So that's why it can be quite confusing. But ultimately, an AI agent is just a piece of software that uses AI to solve tasks by using tools and grounding itself in knowledge that you give it. And that's it. So hopefully that is a bit of a better explanation to you. If you have more questions, just shoot them in the comment section below, and I'll see you soon. Ciao, ciao.